Okay, if you want to take up your Bibles, it may well be on the overhead as well. Our reading today is Luke chapter 7, verses 1 to 10. The faith of the centurion. And from verse 7, when Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was ill and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come to heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built a synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve you to have you under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well.
Let's pray before we look at this passage. Father God, we come to your word recognizing that we need your Spirit to guide us through everything that is here so that we understand it. So enable the Spirit to bring it to our hearts, and may our hearts and minds be open to your word and your Spirit now, we ask. Amen. We just put up this picture if we can. Does anybody recognize this bridge? Does anybody recognize this bridge? France, very good, yes. Anybody driven over this bridge? I think so. I think so. It depends where it is. It's south. It's a southern France. No. Anybody recognize the bridge? Anybody want to tell us where it is? Oh, apart from southern. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's Millau Bridge, I think it's called, something like that. I know you say it in French. It's 2.5 kilometres long. Flick on to the next picture. It's 343 kilometres high, which means that you could put the Eiffel Tower next to one of those columns. Thank you. You could put the Eiffel Tower next to one of those columns, and it would stand just neatly next to it. It cost 400 million euros to build. And instead of going down into the valley and having to drive back up again, you just go straight across, and it's quite impressive. I saw a program where they were building it. I didn't see all the program. I missed most of the program, but I think it was on Top Gear as well. I think they drove over this in Top Gear. It is elegant. It is beautiful if you look at it. Next picture as well. The cloud goes underneath. It's elegant. It's beautiful. It's clever the way it's made. But most of all, I think it's just impressive, all right? And I would love to just drive over. Can't see me going all the way to France just to cross a bridge, but I'd love to drive over it just for that feeling of wow, especially if the clouds are below you. It's so impressive. There are sort of structures, buildings that we may have seen, we may have gone to places, and when you look at them and you stand at the bottom, you look up and they are so impressive. Or maybe you meet people. I don't know about you. Through my life, I've met people here and there, and they seem very ordinary. But when you get to know them, you find there's something really, really impressive about them. There's a fellow called Rick Norton. He tells the story of his dad. His dad left school in the 30s when the Depression was on. His dad then enlisted in the 40s and served in the Pacific Ocean. He was as an American. He brought up with his wife 3 children. He attended college. He got a degree. He worked all his life, and then right at the end, he retires. Not right at the end, close to the end. He retired. He has 2 years with his wife, and then his wife passes away. And he thinks, what am I going to do with my time? To make use of his time, he helps a prisoner learn to read. It was part of the sort of release agreement for this prisoner that he had to take lessons and learn to read. He enjoyed that so much, he helped another man who couldn't read whose wife was going blind, he helped her to read. Then he realized, this is what I'm good at. In his late 60s, he found his true calling in life. He volunteered at one of the local primary schools, and he drove miles each day in a clapped-out old car, and he spent his days, teaching children to read and to spell and to do their maths. It got to the point where everybody in the school called him Grandad. He even got a cap that said, "Call me Grandad." Over the years, from his mid to late 60s, right through to the age of 88, he was going backwards and forwards in his clapped-out old car to this school, and each day teaching children to read. At his funeral service, he got ill, and he then spent some time in an old people's home. Literally, he went for a nap, and he never woke up again. And at his funeral service, at the age of 88, his family were sorting things out in the home, and they discovered a number of awards and newspaper clippings and videotape interviews of this man and what he was doing in the community that they didn't really know about. At the funeral service, the local school got involved, and they did a 15-minute video with all the children appearing in it. And the family met people who came up to him and said, "I got this. My son got an A in maths because of Grandad Norton teaching him. My daughter won a spelling bee because of Grandad Norton teaching." He was so soft-hearted that even though he was on a fixed income and drove a clapped-out old car, if he saw a child coming to school in the winter without a coat, and they were one of his children that he taught, he made sure they got a coat. And at Christmas time, if he knew of children that he taught that he knew wouldn't be getting Christmas presents, he went off and he bought them Christmas presents. Grandad Norton was one of those people that you cannot fail to be impressed by if you knew him. Now, I'm telling you about buildings that are impressive, and I want to tell you about people that are impressive, because I don't want you to miss this. In Luke chapter 7, verses 1 to 10, there's this centurion, and I have to say, I think he's one of the most impressive people we meet in the New Testament. Jesus stood back after meeting this man and was amazed. Now, I imagine that it takes quite something to amaze the Son of God. I really do. Not only that, he said that this man had great faith. I don't know about you, I'd love to have great faith, wouldn't you? Well, look, let's spend some time looking at these verses and consider this man, and let's see if it just improves our faith life, if it helps us. Romans 7, this centurion is a deeply impressive man. So let's look at this. The first little point, I've got two little points. The first little point is this. This is what faith is meant to look like. And there are lessons here for us. This is what faith is. If we say that we're a man or woman of faith, it is meant to live out, seep out of our lives. This is what faith is meant to look like. Here, Luke 7, Luke, a Gentile, is writing a story of Jesus' life to other Gentiles. And what does he do in Luke 7? He features what? Another Gentile. I don't know if deep down Luke's a bit smug about this. Writing two Gentiles, I'm a Gentile, writing two Gentiles about, and the hero in this passage is a Gentile. Let's go through the background of what goes on, and hopefully we can come away impressed by this man's faith, and hopefully then we can see, right, I need to ensure that I'm living my faith out in this same way. So the background, if you look at verse 1, it says that Jesus enters Capernaum. Now the Bible tells us, and from what we understand, Jesus kind of made a base at Capernaum. He was from Nazareth. He'd sort of been rejected at Nazareth. They threatened to kill him. Well, they tried to kill him, so he'd left. And he kind of creates a new base in Capernaum. Now, if you know your Bibles and you read about Capernaum, there's not much good that's said about Capernaum. In fact, they say at one point, Jesus says at one point, he said, if the miracles that had happened in Capernaum happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, or Sodom he mentions in Matthew 11, verse 23. He said, if the miracles that happened in Capernaum happened in Sodom, then Sodom wouldn't have been destroyed by God's judgment. So they weren't really a believing sort of town or people. And yet here is this centurion in the mix, in the middle of all that. We're told in these verses that the elders come to this Jesus, basically saying, look, there's a centurion in our town. His servant is dying. He's seriously ill. He's about to die. And we think he deserves it. We want you to make this servant better. Now, before we think about what's being requested, I thank you, Stuart, for bringing up the Roman. Didn't that fella look mean? All right. The Roman centurions were very impressive individuals. And it's worth considering this before we go on, but considering just what it meant to be a Roman centurion. A Roman legion was normally 6,000 men. So when you think that Bible story about Jesus meeting the demon who's called Legion, you're thinking, whoa. The Roman legion was 6,000 men. Those 6,000 men were divided out into 60 groups. And each group was 100 men. And each group of 100 men would have one centurion who looked over them. And these centurions came up through the ranks. These were fighting men who were kind of really, they weren't officers that were just trained up and ruled. These were the men that came from within. A Greek historian whose name I daren't try, he said, I think his name Polybius or something like that. All right. Anyway, he said that these men were not danger seekers. They weren't reckless men. These were steady, reliable individuals, ready to hold the line, even to the point of death. He said they inspired the men around them. Now, I've only chatted to soldiers a couple of times, but some soldiers have said, one particular fella said to me, he said, it's not fighting for Queen and country. You actually, when you're there at the time, you're fighting for the people next to you. And this Roman soldier was that sort of person that inspired fight from the people next to him. This Greek historian said the centurions were the finest men in the Roman army. So he paints a superb picture of them. And then if you take, that's what the Greek historian has said, if you take what does the Bible say about Roman centurions? Did you know every single time a Roman centurion appears in the Bible, they come out of it really well. You know that? Every single time. Here, at the cross, there is the Roman centurion who stands back and says, surely this is the Son of God. In the book of Acts, in some cases, it's the Roman centurion that steps in and saves Paul. The first Gentile, I'm not going to count the Ethiopian eunuch who was kind of a Jewish convert. The first sort of genuine Gentile converted was who? Acts chapter 10. Cornelius. What was he? A Roman centurion. These were quality individuals who'd worked their way up. I can't say that of every single one of them, but generally. And then you see his faith. And look at his faith, because this is what faith is meant to look like. First of all, he cared. He cared for his servant. Now that was completely countercultural. That was completely against the thinking of the time. Aristotle, he said that slaves and servants were just tools and instruments. Gaius, who was a Roman legal expert, he said the only difference between a slave, an animal, and a cart is that a slave can talk. No difference otherwise. Cato, now I don't know if that's how you really pronounce his name, but I hope it is. All right. Cato, who was another Roman writer who wrote on agriculture, he said, if a slave is sick, you treat them like a worn-out animal and you throw them away. Now that is the culture of the day. And Stuart's already said, this man would already believe in many gods. And he's brought up in this particular culture, and yet he cares for this slave. That is completely different to the values around him. He cared for this slave, this servant. Not only that, he cared for the Jewish people. Verse 5 said that the Jews, now I don't imagine the Jews liked many Romans, but they came on the behalf of this Roman to Jesus and said, he loves our people. He has built our synagogue. Now, that is a man, probably with means and wealth, who has built a synagogue that he's probably allowed into, but definitely not allowed to worship at. And yet he's done it. He cared for these people. He cared for his Jewish neighbors. This centurion had faith that led to good works. It led to him caring and building. And that's an example to us, because our faith needs to lead to actions. Somebody once said that faith is not belief. Belief is passive. Faith is active. It needs to convert into actions. Not only was he caring, but this man was humble. I think he had every right, as it were. Well, that's the wrong way of putting it. But you could understand him being arrogant, let's put it that way. But he wasn't. He was humble. The elders of the town said, he deserves this. He deserves you, Jesus, to go over there and heal his servant. But that's not what he said. When Jesus was coming to the house, he said, I don't deserve you to come to my house. Which is an incredible attitude for a man in this situation. Contrast the estimation of him that the Jews had to the estimation that he had himself. Just contrast. It's never deserving, though, and it's faith that actually brings the help, I think, of Jesus. We can never deserve God's attention. We can never deserve God's blessing, but we can, in faith, ask for both. This centurion could have come to Jesus and he could have said, I have cared for your people. I have built your people a synagogue. That has notched me up some points. Now I have a servant who's ill and dying. I think you need to step in. He could have taken that approach, but he didn't take that approach. He was humble. Let me ask you a question. Now think about this. Where did his faith come from? Where did his faith actually come from? If you read through these verses, you look down at verse 3 and you see that the centurion heard of Jesus. So you get the impression that there's been rumors about this Jesus. There's been reports about this Jesus. And this centurion has heard enough to demonstrate what is only, as Jesus said, amazing, great faith. He's heard little snippets of this Jesus, but it is enough for him to demonstrate this faith. So I want to put this as a second thought. I don't know if this is the right, but this is, faith came from what he thought of Jesus. Faith came from what he thought. Now, I know if you're going to be absolutely biblical, faith comes from God working within our hearts. But in this situation, just looking at these verses, faith came from what he thought of Jesus. He heard these reports and he thinks. And as he thinks, faith. He thought, now there's two things I want to point out from the verses. He thought Jesus had power, and he thought Jesus had authority. This is what he says in verse 6 and 7. Lord, isn't that interesting? He addresses Jesus as Lord, not rabbi, teacher, which is what a lot of other people address him as, or master if you go to certain Gospels. He says, Lord, don't trouble yourself. Now, it's not clear if he is there. In Matthew's Gospel, he's standing, as it were, there in front of Jesus. In Luke's Gospel, basically, he always speaks through other people, as if he may be standing back, he may not have come. And I think it's probably somewhere in between. He's probably standing back. Maybe that he's using interpreters, and they're speaking for him, and he tells them what to say. But he says this, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, he says. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. And then he says this, but say the word, and my servant will be healed. How about that? That's incredible faith, isn't it? He said, you don't need to come to me. You just say the word, and they'll be healed. His logic is just wonderful. You've got the power to do it. Coming here doesn't make any difference. Just say the word, it'll be done. And then you see where that logic comes from. Because he talks then about authority. Now, I have to say, I admire. Do you remember Star Trek? I mean, we're not talking these recent editions, but I'm talking the old vintage Star Trek with Dr. Spock, all right? When the only thing that made someone an alien from a completely different planet is slightly different shaped ears and a weird haircut, you know. Now, there's Dr. Spock, and what was he famous for? Logic. And he thought differently, and he saw things differently, because what governed his thinking was logic. Well, I have to say, as I read through this passage and look at this centurion, there's a logic that governs his thinking and his thoughts. You see, he's heard a little bit about Jesus. He's processing the information, and he's got a totally logical approach. And it's like nothing else you see in the Bible because of what he says next. This is what he says next. He said next to Jesus, "For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this soldier, go, and he goes. I tell another one, come, and he comes. And I say to another servant, do this, and he does it." What is he saying to Jesus? Now, it's interesting, that's how the NIV, the version of Bible, some of the other versions of the Bible put that first little phrase that he says to Jesus differently. In verses 7 and 8, for instance, the English Standard Version says this, "For I too am a man under or set under authority." In the New King James, or the King James Version, it says this, "For I also am a man placed under authority." What is he saying to Jesus? What is the logic that is sort of the beginning, the groundings of this faith? The logic is this. He is saying to Jesus, Jesus, you and me are in the same boat. I know what it is to take orders. I know what it is to give orders. And you are just the same. My orders come from Rome, and I obey them. Your orders come from God, and you obey them. That is, in essence, what he's saying here when he says, "For I also am a man under authority." I am like you. You're like me on this one. We are both men under authority, and we are both men with authority. So that means you only have to say the word, and it happens. He is using, as it were, his experience and his understanding and the logic of his situation to say to Jesus, I've got an understanding of you. I know who you are. This centurion had grasped something that others had not grasped. Other people had not got this. He is in essence saying here, I know that you've been sent by God. I know that you have God's authority. I know that you're a man under authority, and I know that you're a man with authority. You're the same as me. He's saying that to Jesus. And this centurion, who has lived under authority all this time, can recognize authority when it comes in front of him. He can recognize it in Jesus. And he can rest on that and just say, you just say the word, and it happens. You don't need to come to my house. You just say the word, and it happens. No one else at this point, and it takes the disciples a long time, no one else gets who Jesus is and the authority he's got like this man. And I find that incredibly impressive. Better than the bridge? Yeah. Better than the fellow who does the thing with the children? Yeah, if I'm honest. I find that incredibly impressive. And I think Luke has featured this man, and he's saying to you and me, he said, look, this is what faith looks like. This is what we can be in our faith. We can trust the one who has all the authority. And that's where I really want to finish off. So to sum up, faith for the Christian is taking Jesus at his word, taking God at his word. The one who said, he who believes in me has everlasting life. Now, this centurion had not heard that from Jesus. All he'd heard was rumors of a man that can heal. But it was enough for him to recognize Jesus' power and from that his authority. Here we have a first-class example. He's not a Jew. He's not even a disciple. But he's got, as it were, a handle on who Jesus really is. This is what faith looks like. A man who cared a man who was active in his community, a man who was humble. We need to be displaying the same sort of faith as this centurion. And in a very real way, we have more to go on than the centurion had. His faith came from what he thought of Jesus. It made sense. It was logical from the little he heard to recognize that Jesus had power, that Jesus had authority when he saw it or heard of it. The end result is that his great faith is rewarded. His valued servant is healed. And what does Jesus do? So what it says in verse 9, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, I tell you, I have not found such great faith in Israel. What's he doing? I think teachers do this sometimes at school. It didn't happen much to me at school, but when it did happen, it felt good. You've done a good piece of work at school. And the teacher holds it up. And he says, Martin's done this. It's wonderful. That didn't happen very often. All right. But in essence, that's what Jesus is doing here. He's turning everybody to this centurion. He's saying, look at that man's faith. It's wonderful. It's great. It's amazing. And the essence then for us to walk away from this story is to say, I can put my faith in Jesus. I might not have great faith like this. But then elsewhere, Jesus talks about faith like a mustard seed. And he's saying it's not really how much faith we have. Actually, it's what you invest your faith in that matters. But it's amazing what you can do the more faith you have. You know, only twice in the Bible does Jesus ever say that someone has got great faith. Do you know when the other one is? No. There's a Canaanite woman. Now, both the Roman centurion and the Canaanite woman be despised by the Jews, you know. And yet they are the two individuals that come forward with great faith in the Bible. Matthew 15, a Canaanite woman, she comes forward and Jesus says, you've got great faith. And I wonder to myself how many times Jesus would love to say to you and me, whoa, you've got great faith. I'm sure he was delighted to meet this man. I'm sure he was delighted to meet that Canaanite woman. And I'm sure he's delighted when we show and demonstrate in our lives great faith.